The silence that hung over the dusty trail was broken only by the sound of two small hearts beating in unison, their identical faces streaked with tears and grime as they huddled beneath the shadow of a towering oak. In the vast expanse of the Texas frontier in 1875, no sight was more pitiful than that of abandoned children, especially the twin girls who had never uttered a single word since the day they were born. The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly as Deacon James wiped the sweat from his brow with a bandana that had once been red but was now faded to the color of dried blood. His weathered hands gripped the reins of his paint horse, Samson, as they plodded along the barely visible trail. 3 days on the road from Fort Worth had left him dusty and bone-tired. His tall frame slouched slightly in the saddle. At 32, Deacon had seen his fair share of hardship on the frontier. The Civil War had taken his youth, and 10 years of cowboying had hardened what remained. His dark brown hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, and his eyes a stormy blue that could flash with anger or soften with kindness had seen too much suffering for a man his age. The last cattle drive had been profitable enough to allow him a brief respite before the next one began. He was headed to his small cabin nestled at the edge of Whispering Creek, a place he rarely had time to visit but still called home. "Almost there, boy," he murmured to Samson, who flicked his ears in acknowledgement. "Just a few more miles, and you can rest those legs." As they rounded a bend in the trail, Deacon spotted something unusual beneath a massive oak tree. Squinting against the glare, he made out two small figures huddled together. Children, by the look of them, and completely alone. "Whoa," he called softly, pulling Samson to a halt. He dismounted cautiously, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dry earth. Years of living on the frontier had taught him to approach unknown situations with caution, but there was no mistaking the vulnerability of the two small forms before him. They were little girls, no more than 4 or 5 years old, with identical faces, matted blonde hair, and wide, fearful eyes. Twins, dressed in tattered calico dresses that might have once been pretty but were now stained and torn. Their faces were streaked with dirt and tears, and they clung to each other as if their lives depended on it. "Hello there," Deacon said, keeping his voice gentle as he approached slowly. "Are you lost?" The girls didn't respond. They stared at him with identical pairs of frightened blue eyes, pressing closer together as he neared. Deacon crouched down, staying a respectful distance away. "I won't hurt you," he promised, reaching into his saddlebag. "Are you hungry?" He pulled out a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a purchase from the last town he'd passed through. Breaking off a chunk, he offered it to the children. After a moment's hesitation, one of the twins, the one with a small birthmark near her left eye, reached out a trembling hand and took it. The girls devoured the bread, sharing it between them with practiced movements that spoke of a deep bond. Deacon watched them, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. "Where's your mama?" he asked gently. "Your pa." The twins stared back at him, silent as stones. They didn't even shake their heads. "Can you speak?" he tried again. Nothing. Not even a nod or shake of the head. Just those wide, wary eyes watching his every move. Deacon sat back on his heels, considering his options. He couldn't leave two small children alone in the wilderness. The nearest town, Willow Springs, was still 10 miles away. His cabin was closer, but he had little experience with children, let alone girls who wouldn't or couldn't speak. "Well," he said finally, "I can't leave you here. There are coyotes and all manner of creatures that come out at night." He gestured to Samson. "That's my horse. He's gentle. Would you like to ride him?" The twins exchanged a glance that seemed to convey an entire conversation. Finally, the one with the birthmark gave the slightest of nods. "All right then," Deacon said, relief flooding through him. "I'll take you to my cabin for tonight. Tomorrow we can ride into town and see about finding your folks." He approached slowly, lifting first one child and then the other onto Samson's back. The girls sat rigidly, their small hands gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles. Deacon led the horse on foot, glancing back frequently to ensure the twins were secure. As they traveled, he tried to engage them in conversation, pointing out birds and talking about his cabin, but the girls remained silent. Their eyes, however, took in everything: the landscape, the sky, and Deacon himself, as if assessing whether he could be trusted. By the time they reached his cabin, The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The small log structure stood in a clearing near a bubbling creek, surrounded by pine trees and wildflowers. It wasn't much a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen, but it was sturdy and clean. "Here we are," Deacon announced, helping the girls down from Samson. "It's not fancy, but it's safe." After seeing to his horse, Deacon ushered the twins inside. They stood in the center of the main room, holding hands and looking around with curious eyes. "Are you hungry?" he asked, moving to the kitchen. "I've got some jerky and beans. Maybe some dried apples." He set about preparing a simple meal, aware of the girls watching his every move. As he worked, he wondered about their story. Who had left two small children alone on the trail? Were their parents dead, or had they been abandoned? And why didn't they speak? The meal was consumed in silence, the twins eating methodically, their movements mirroring each other's. Afterward, Deacon made up a bed for them on a pallet near the fire, using his spare blankets and a pillow from his own bed. "You sleep here," he told them, gesturing to the makeshift bed. "I'll be right over there if you need anything." He pointed to his bedroom door. The twins climbed onto the pallet, still fully dressed, and huddled together beneath the blanket. Their eyes remained open, watching him with that same wary expression. "Good night," Deacon said softly, retreating to his own room. He left the door ajar, troubled by the strange circumstances that had brought these children into his care. Sleep eluded him as he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions. Just before dawn, he heard a soft sound from the main room. Quietly, he rose and peered through the partially open door. The twins were awake, sitting up on their pallet. One was gently stroking the other's hair, and they were communicating in a way Deacon had never seen before, with subtle gestures, expressions, and touches that seemed to convey entire thoughts. They understood each other perfectly, existing in a world of their own making. In that moment, watching the silent communion between the two girls, Deacon James knew his life had changed irrevocably. Whatever had happened to bring these children to that oak tree, whatever had silenced their voices, he was now responsible for them until he could find someone who rightfully could claim them. Little did he know that miles away, a young woman was desperately searching for her missing nieces, her heart breaking more with each passing hour. Catherine Gray urged her exhausted mare forward, her throat raw from calling out the twins' names. For 2 days, she had been combing the countryside, searching every hollow, creek bed, and trail between her sister's homestead and Willow Springs. "Jessie, Jane," she called, though her voice was now little more than a hoarse whisper. "Where are you?" At 26, Catherine had already weathered more than her share of hardship. Orphaned at 18, she had raised her younger sister Rachel until her marriage 3 years ago to Thomas Willis, a man Catherine had never fully trusted. When Rachel died in childbirth a year later, leaving behind twin daughters, Catherine had tried to step in and help, but Thomas had been resistant. 2 weeks ago, she had received a letter from her brother-in-law, asking her to come at once. When she arrived at the homestead, she found Thomas dead from a fever and no sign of the girls. According to neighbors, Thomas had been planning to take the twins to an orphanage in Fort Worth, unable to care for them while working the land. Catherine had immediately set out to find them, determined not to let her nieces grow up in an institution. Her search had yielded nothing until yesterday, when a trapper mentioned seeing a man with 2 small blonde girls heading toward Whispering Creek. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. As twilight descended, Catherine reluctantly made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods. Her body ached with fatigue, but her mind remained alert, planning her next moves. The twins had never spoken a word, not to her, not to anyone. The doctor in Fort Worth had examined them after Rachel's death and found nothing physically wrong with them. They simply didn't speak, communicating only with each other through gestures and expressions that no one else could interpret. Catherine stared into her small campfire, remembering the precious moments she'd spent with her nieces during her visits. Though they never spoke to her, they had accepted her presence, sometimes even allowing her to read to them or brush their hair. Their silence was not rejection, it was simply their way. "I'll find you," she whispered to the night sky. "I promise." Morning found her back in the saddle, following the vague directions toward Whispering Creek. By midday, she spotted a thin column of smoke rising above the trees in the distance. A homestead, perhaps, where she might ask for information. As she approached, she saw a modest cabin with a small corral where a paint horse grazed. A man was chopping wood in the yard, his broad shoulders flexing with each swing of the axe. And there Catherine's heart leaped. Sitting on a fallen log nearby were two small figures with blonde hair. "Jesse, Jane," she cried, spurring her mare forward. The man turned at her call, axe held ready as she galloped into the clearing. The twins looked up, their identical faces registering surprise. Catherine practically fell from her saddle in her haste to reach her nieces. The girls stood, uncertain but not frightened, as she rushed toward them. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed, dropping to her knees before them. "I've been so worried. Are you all right?" The twins stared at her, and then, in a gesture that brought fresh tears to Catherine's eyes, they each reached out to touch her face, as if confirming she was real. "Madam," a deep voice interrupted. "May I ask who you are?" Catherine looked up to see the man standing a few feet away, axe lowered but still in hand. He was tall, with weathered features and watchful blue eyes. His stance was protective, positioned slightly between her and the girls. "I'm Catherine Gray," she said, rising to her feet. "These are my nieces, Jessie and Jane Willis. I've been searching for them for days." Her voice broke. "Their father died, and they disappeared. I thought I'd lost them forever." The man's expression softened slightly, but caution remained in his eyes. "Can you prove they're your kin?" Catherine reached into her pocket and withdrew a small daguerreotype. "This is their mother, my sister Rachel, with the twins as babies." She handed it to him. "They have a distinctive birthmark. Jessie has one by her left eye." The man studied the image, then looked at the twins. The girl with the birthmark, Jessie, was watching the exchange intently. "I'm Deacon James," he said finally, handing back the photograph. "Found them yesterday under an oak tree about 10 miles back. They were alone, hungry. I couldn't leave them there." He paused. "They don't speak." "They never have," Catherine confirmed. "Not since they were born. The doctors don't know why." Deacon nodded slowly. "They seem to understand each other just fine, though." "Yes," Catherine agreed, looking at her nieces with love. "They have their own way of communicating." An awkward silence fell, broken only by the soft nickering of horses in the corral. "You must be exhausted," Deacon said finally. "And hungry too, I reckon. I was about to fix some lunch. You're welcome to join us." Catherine hesitated. The proper thing would be to thank him, gather the twins, and leave immediately. But she was bone-weary, her mare needed rest, and now that the desperate search was over, the full weight of her exhaustion was catching up to her. "That's very kind," she said. "Thank you." Inside the cabin, Catherine watched as the twins moved comfortably around the space, clearly already familiar with their surroundings. They set the table without being asked, working in perfect tandem. "They've been helping out," Deacon explained, noting her surprise. "Quick learners." "They always have been," Catherine said softly. "Smart as whips, both of them." Over a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, Catherine explained the situation: her sister's death, Thomas's plan to take the twins to an orphanage, his subsequent illness and death. "I came as soon as I got his letter," she said, "but I was too late. He was already gone, and so were the girls. I've been searching ever since." "They're lucky to have someone who cares so much," Deacon observed. There was something in his eyes, a shadow of old pain, perhaps, that made Catherine wonder about his own story. "I'm the lucky one," she said. "They're all I have left of my sister." After the meal, Catherine helped clean up, while Deacon took the girls outside to feed the chickens. Through the window, she watched as he patiently showed them how to scatter the feed, his large hands gentle as he guided theirs. The twins seemed at ease with him, which surprised her. They usually shied away from strangers, especially men. When Deacon returned, he found Catherine standing by the window, lost in thought. "They're good girls," he said. "Been no trouble at all." "Thank you for taking care of them," Catherine replied. "I should get them home before dark." "Where is home?" Deacon asked. Catherine hesitated. "I have a small place near Fort Worth. It's not much, but it's ours." "That's a long ride with two little ones," Deacon observed. "Especially after the journey you've had." "We'll manage," Catherine said, though the thought of the long return trip made her muscles ache in protest. Deacon seemed to debate with himself before speaking again. You're welcome to stay the night. I can sleep in the lean-to. You and the girls can have the cabin. Catherine's first instinct was to refuse. She hardly knew this man, despite his kindness to the twins. But the thought of trying to make it back to Fort Worth with two exhausted children before nightfall was daunting. That's very generous, she said finally. If you're sure it's no imposition. No imposition, Deacon assured her. Least I can do. As evening fell, Catherine settled the twins on the pallet by the fire, the same place they had slept the night before. She sat between them, softly singing a lullaby their mother had once sung. The girls didn't speak, but their eyes grew heavy, and soon they were asleep, their small hands clasped together as always. Catherine remained seated on the floor beside them, watching their peaceful faces in the firelight. They looked so much like Rachel that it made her heart ache. A soft knock at the door startled her. Deacon entered, carrying an armful of firewood. Thought you might need more for the night, he whispered, seeing the sleeping children. Thank you, Catherine replied softly. He added logs to the fire, then straightened, studying the twins. They sleep like that every night, he observed. Holding hands. They always have, Catherine said. Even as babies. My sister said they'd cry if they were separated. Deacon nodded thoughtfully. Must be a special bond between them. It is, Catherine agreed. Sometimes I think they don't need words because they understand each other so completely without them. A comfortable silence fell between them as they both watched the sleeping children. Catherine was acutely aware of Deacon's presence, his tall frame silhouetted against the firelight, the gentle way he moved despite his size, the kind eyes that had softened whenever he looked at the twins. I should let you rest, he said finally. Been a long day for you. For all of us, Catherine replied. Thank you again, Mr. James. For everything. Deacon, he corrected with a small smile. Just Deacon is fine. Catherine, she offered in return. He nodded. Good night, Catherine. After he left, Catherine prepared for bed, her mind turning over the events of the past few days. She had found her nieces safe and sound, thanks to the kindness of a stranger. Tomorrow, they would begin the journey home, back to their small house near Fort Worth, where she would raise them as her own. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, she found herself thinking not of the journey ahead, but of Deacon James, the gentle cowboy who had fed two silent children and asked about their mother. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. Deacon had been awake for hours, unable to sleep with thoughts of Catherine Gray and the twins occupying his mind. He'd spent most of his adult life alone, drifting from one cattle drive to another, rarely staying in one place long enough to form connections. Now, in the span of 2 days, his solitary existence had been invaded by 3 females who had somehow gotten under his skin. He was making coffee when Catherine emerged from the cabin, her honey-brown hair tied back in a simple braid, her green eyes alert despite the early hour. Good morning, she said, approaching the fire where he had the coffee pot brewing. The girls are still sleeping. They had a big day yesterday, Deacon replied, pouring her a cup of the strong black liquid. Finding their aunt and all. Catherine accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. I can't thank you enough for taking care of them. If you hadn't found them. She didn't finish the thought. Anyone would have done the same, Deacon said, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. The frontier could be a harsh place, and not everyone would take in 2 strange children. Will you be heading back to Fort Worth today? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Catherine nodded. Yes, though it will take us a few days. I'll need to find a wagon in Willow Springs. The girls can't ride double with me all the way to Fort Worth. Deacon frowned. The trail can be dangerous. Outlaws, wild animals. We'll be careful, Catherine assured him, though there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. Deacon hesitated, then said, I could ride with you, at least as far as Willow Springs. Help you get a wagon. Catherine looked surprised. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose further. You've already done so much. It's no imposition, Deacon said. Was heading that way myself. It wasn't entirely true. He'd had no specific plans, but the thought of Catherine and the twins traveling alone troubled him. Before she could respond, a small sound from the cabin drew their attention. The twins were awake, standing in the doorway hand in hand, watching them with curious eyes. Good morning, sweethearts, Catherine called, her face lighting up at the sight of them. Did you sleep well? The twins nodded in unison, a rare direct response that made Catherine smile. They approached cautiously, their eyes darting between the adults. Mr. James has offered to ride with us to Willow Springs, Catherine told them, crouching down to their level. What do you think of that? The girls exchanged one of their mysterious glances. Then Jessie, the one with the birthmark, reached out and touched Deacon's hand. It was a brief contact, but the meaning was clear: acceptance. Well, Catherine said, clearly surprised by the gesture. I guess that settles it. After a breakfast of oatmeal and the last of Deacon's dried apples, they prepared to leave. Deacon packed his few essentials, secured the cabin, and saddled Samson. The twins would ride with him, while Catherine followed on her mare. As they set off toward Willow Springs, Deacon was acutely aware of the small bodies pressed against him, Jessie in front, Jane behind, their arms wrapped around each other in the middle. They weighed almost nothing, these silent children who communicated volumes with their eyes. Catherine rode alongside when the trail allowed, and they talked intermittently throughout the morning. He learned that she had been a schoolteacher before her sister's death, that she had a small plot of land left by her parents, and that she made extra money by sewing for neighbors. In turn, he told her about his years as a cowboy, the cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, the brief stint as a scout for the Army during the final years of the Indian Wars. He didn't mention the war itself, those memories were still too raw, but she seemed to understand the gaps in his narrative. And your family? She asked as they stopped to rest the horses near a small stream. Are they in Texas? Deacon shook his head. Lost my pa to fever when I was 12. Ma remarried a few years later and moved to California with my stepfather. Haven't seen them since. No brothers or sisters? Had a brother, Deacon said quietly. He died at Shiloh. Catherine's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry. Deacon nodded, accepting her sympathy but unwilling to dwell on the past. Been on my own a long time. Got used to it. The twins, who had been splashing in the shallow water nearby, suddenly froze, their heads tilted as if listening. A moment later, Deacon heard it too, the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Get the girls, he said to Catherine, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Catherine quickly gathered the twins, pulling them back from the stream as three riders emerged from the trees on the opposite bank. They were rough-looking men, unshaven and dirty, with hard eyes that assessed the small group with predatory interest. Well, the leader said, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek. What have we here? Just passing through. Deacon replied evenly, his stance casual but alert. Heading to Willow Springs. The leader's gaze lingered on Catherine and the twins. Pretty little family you got there. We don't want any trouble, Deacon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Just watering our horses. The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. No trouble. Just being neighborly. He looked at his companions. Ain't that right, boys? The other men chuckled, their eyes never leaving Catherine. Deacon shifted slightly, positioning himself between the riders and Catherine and the twins. You boys need something specific? The leader's smile faded. Might be we do. Been a while since we've had female company. His hand moved toward his gun. Might be worth your while to ride on. Leave the lady with us. Deacon's revolver was in his hand before the man could blink, cocked, and aimed at the leader's chest. Might be you boys should reconsider. The standoff lasted only seconds, but to Catherine, watching with her arms protectively around the twins, it felt like an eternity. The leader's eyes flicked from Deacon's steady gun hand to his cold, determined expression, and something in what he saw made him recalculate. Easy now, he said, raising his hand slightly. Just funning with you. No need for bloodshed. Then I suggest you boys move along, Deacon said, his aim never wavering. Now, the leader nodded slowly, then gestured to his companions. Come on, boys. Plenty of other streams in Texas. They backed their horses away, then turned and rode off at a trot, glancing back once before disappearing into the trees. Deacon holstered his weapon, his shoulders relaxing slightly. You all right? He asked, turning to Catherine. She nodded, though her face was pale. Thank you. The twins were staring at Deacon with wide eyes, not frightened but assessing, as if they had just learned something important about him. We should move on, he said, helping Catherine and the girls back onto their horses. Those men might circle back. They rode hard for the next hour, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the potential threat. The twins, remarkably, seemed unfazed by the fast pace, clinging to Deacon without complaint. By late afternoon, they reached Willow Springs, a small but growing town that served as a trading post for the surrounding ranches and farms. The main street was lined with the usual establishments: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a blacksmith, and a church at the far end. Deacon led them to the livery stable, where he inquired about a wagon. "Got a small buckboard I could sell you," the livery owner said after hearing their situation. "Not fancy, but sturdy enough. Comes with a gentle team that won't spook easy." The price was steep but fair. Catherine counted out the money from a small purse she kept hidden in her dress, her expression determined despite the obvious drain on her resources. "I'll help you get provisions for the journey," Deacon offered as they left the stable. "There's a decent general store here." At the store, Catherine purchased flour, coffee, bacon, beans, and other necessities while Deacon found a small tent and extra blankets. The twins followed them silently, holding hands as always, their identical faces solemn as they watched the transactions. "You'll need protection," Deacon said quietly as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. He handed Catherine a small revolver from his saddlebag. "Know how to use one of these?" Catherine took the weapon with a surprising familiarity. "My father taught me. I haven't fired one in years, but I remember how." Deacon nodded, impressed. "Good. Keep it close." As the sun began to set, they faced the question of where to spend the night. The small hotel was an option, but Catherine was clearly counting her remaining funds with concern. "I know a spot just outside town," Deacon suggested. "Clean, with a good spring. Better than paying for rooms, and we can get an early start tomorrow." Catherine agreed, and they set up camp in a grove of cottonwoods near a bubbling spring. Deacon built a fire while Catherine prepared a simple dinner, the twins helping in their silent, efficient way. After the meal, as twilight deepened into night, the four of them sat around the fire. The twins, exhausted from the day's journey, fell asleep leaning against each other, their small faces peaceful in the firelight. Catherine gazed at them with a mixture of love and concern. "I worry about them," she admitted softly. "About their silence. What kind of life they'll have if they never speak." "They communicate just fine," Deacon observed. "Just not in ways most folks understand." "Yes, but the world can be cruel to those who are different," Catherine said. "I've seen it as a teacher. Children can be unkind." Deacon studied the sleeping twins, his expression thoughtful. "They're strong, these two. And they have each other. That's more than many have. And they have you," Deacon added, his eyes meeting Catherine's across the fire. "A woman who'd ride across half of Texas to find them." Catherine smiled, touched by his understanding. "They're worth it. They're everything to me now." The conversation drifted to other topics as the night deepened. Catherine spoke of her childhood in Virginia, her family's move to Texas after the war, her hopes for a teaching position in Fort Worth. Deacon shared stories of life on the cattle trails, the characters he'd met, the places he'd seen. It was the longest conversation Deacon had had with anyone in years, and he found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of talking with someone who listened, who asked thoughtful questions, who laughed at his rare attempts at humor. As the fire burned down to embers, Catherine's eyes grew heavy. "I should sleep," she said reluctantly. "Long day tomorrow." "I'll keep watch," Deacon offered. "Just to be safe." Catherine nodded gratefully. "Thank you. For everything." As she settled beside the twins, pulling a blanket over all three of them, Deacon added another log to the fire and leaned back against his saddle. He watched the flames dance, listening to the night sounds of the Texas wilderness and the soft breathing of the three females sleeping nearby. Tomorrow, they would reach Willow Springs, and he would help them prepare for the journey to Fort Worth. And then, what? Return to his cabin? Prepare for the next cattle drive? The life that had seemed sufficient just days ago now felt strangely empty when he contemplated returning to it. Deacon shook his head, dismissing the thought. Catherine Gray and her nieces were not his responsibility. He had done what any decent man would do, help them when they needed it. That was all. Yet as he watched the gentle rise and fall of Catherine's chest, the protective way her arm curved around the twins even in sleep, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward this impromptu family. For the first time in more years than he could remember, Deacon James allowed himself to wonder what it might be like to have a home that was more than just a place to hang his hat between drives, a home with voices and laughter, with someone waiting for his return, even if some of those voices spoke only in silence. Willow Springs stirred to life as the morning sun crested the eastern hills. Deacon led the way into town, Samson's hooves raising small clouds of dust on the main street. Behind him, Catherine drove the buckboard with the twins seated beside her, their identical faces watching the town with solemn curiosity. They stopped first at the general store to purchase additional supplies for the journey to Fort Worth. While Catherine selected food staples, Deacon quietly added items he thought might be useful: extra ammunition for the revolver he'd given her, a good knife, waterproof matches, and a small medical kit. "You didn't have to do that," Catherine protested when she saw him paying for the extra supplies. "Trail can be unpredictable," Deacon replied with a shrug. "Better to be prepared." The twins, meanwhile, had discovered a display of penny candy. They stood before it, holding hands as always, their eyes wide with wonder at the colorful assortment. Deacon noticed their interest and approached the shopkeeper. "2 sticks of that whorehound candy," he said, placing the coins on the counter. The man wrapped the candy in paper and handed the package to Deacon, who crouched down to the twins' level. "For the road," he said, offering a stick to each girl. Jessie and Jane accepted the treats with identical expressions of delight, their eyes shining with gratitude. They didn't speak, they never did, but their happiness was evident in the way they clutched the candy and in the small, synchronized nods they gave him. Catherine watched the exchange with a soft smile. "You're spoiling them," she said, but her tone was warm. "Figured they earned a treat," Deacon replied, straightening up. "Been brave little ladies." Outside the store, as they loaded the supplies into the wagon, Deacon found himself reluctant to say goodbye. The thought of Catherine and the twins traveling alone to Fort Worth troubled him, despite her competence and determination. "The trail to Fort Worth can be rough this time of year," he said as they secured the last of the provisions. "Creeks might be high from the spring rains." Catherine nodded, her expression serious. "We'll be careful. I've made the journey before." "Not with 2 little ones," Deacon pointed out. Catherine glanced at the twins, who were sitting patiently in the wagon, still savoring their candy. "No," she admitted. "Not with them." Deacon hesitated, then said, "I could ride with you. See you safely to Fort Worth." Catherine looked surprised. "You've already done so much. I couldn't ask you to delay your own plans further." "Got no pressing engagements," Deacon said with a small smile. "Next cattle drive doesn't start for 3 weeks. Catherine studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "Why would you do that? Escort 3 strangers all the way to Fort Worth?" Deacon shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "Just seems like the right thing to do," he said finally. "World's a dangerous place for a woman and 2 little girls traveling alone." Catherine seemed about to argue, but then her eyes fell on the twins again, and her expression softened. "It would ease my mind to have company on the trail," she admitted. "If you're certain it's no trouble." "No trouble at all," Deacon assured her, relief washing over him. He told himself it was simply concern for their safety that motivated his offer, nothing more. Yet as they set out from Willow Springs, Deacon riding alongside the wagon, he couldn't deny the lightness in his spirit. The open trail ahead seemed full of possibility rather than the lonely miles he was accustomed to. The journey to Fort Worth would take several days, following the winding trail through rolling hills and across streams swollen with spring runoff. They made good time that first day, stopping to rest the horses at midday and making camp as the sun began its descent. Catherine proved to be a capable traveler, handling the wagon with confidence and contributing equally to the tasks of setting up camp and preparing meals. The twins, too, helped in their silent way, gathering kindling for the fire and arranging bedrolls with small, efficient hands. That evening, as they sat around the campfire after a simple dinner of beans and bacon, the twins surprised everyone by producing small wildflower bouquets they had gathered during one of the rest stops. They presented one to Catherine and, to Deacon's astonishment, one to him as well. "Thank you," he said, genuinely touched by the gesture. The flowers were a mix of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, the colors vibrant against his weathered hands. The twins smiled identical small curves of their lips before returning to their spot by the fire. "They like you," Catherine observed softly. That's unusual. They don't warm to people easily, especially men. Deacon twirled the bouquet thoughtfully. Maybe they just know I mean no harm. It's more than that, Catherine said. They trust you. I can see it in the way they look at you. The simple statement warmed Deacon more than he cared to admit. Trust was a precious commodity on the frontier, not given lightly. As the night deepened and the twins drifted off to sleep, Catherine and Deacon continued to talk in low voices. She told him more about her life, her brief engagement to a young banker who had died of typhoid before they could marry, her years of teaching in a one-room schoolhouse, her devotion to her sister and, now, to her nieces. In turn, Deacon shared parts of his own story that he rarely spoke of: his childhood on a small farm in Kentucky, the devastating loss of his brother in the war, his decision to head west afterward in search of a new beginning. "And did you find it?" Catherine asked. "The new beginning?" Deacon stared into the fire, considering the question. "Found a life," he said finally. "Not sure if it's what I was looking for, but it's been enough." "Until now?" Catherine asked perceptively. Deacon glanced at her, surprised by her insight. "Maybe," he admitted. "Things have a way of changing on you when you least expect it." Catherine's smile was gentle in the firelight. "Yes, they do." The following days fell into a comfortable rhythm. They would rise with the sun, break camp, and travel until midday, when they would stop to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. Then back on the trail until evening, when they would make camp, prepare a hot meal, and spend the hours before sleep talking quietly by the fire. The twins continued to be a source of wonder and occasional amusement. They had their own silent language of gestures and expressions, communicating with each other in ways that were impenetrable to the adults. Yet they were also observant and helpful, learning quickly how to assist with camp chores and frequently offering their small bouquets of wildflowers. On the third day, they encountered their first significant obstacle: a creek that had overflowed its banks due to recent rains, making the usual crossing impassable. "We'll have to find another way across," Deacon said, studying the swirling water with concern. "Is there another crossing nearby?" Catherine asked. Deacon frowned. "There's a bridge about 5 miles upstream, but it takes us well off our route. Better than risking the wagons and horses in that," Catherine said, nodding toward the turbulent creek. They altered their course, adding hours to their journey, but safely crossing the creek via the bridge. By the time they made camp that evening, everyone was tired and somewhat dispirited by the delay. The twins were unusually quiet, even for them, their faces drawn with fatigue. Catherine tucked them into their bedrolls early, singing softly until they fell asleep. "They're exhausted," she said, rejoining Deacon by the fire. "It's been a long day for little legs." "They're strong," Deacon observed. "Never complained once." "They never do," Catherine said with a sad smile. "Even when they're hurting or scared, they just endure. It breaks my heart sometimes." Deacon studied her face in the firelight, noting the worry lines around her eyes. "You're good with them. Patient. Understanding." Catherine shrugged. "They're all I have left of Rachel. And they deserve someone who sees them for who they are, not just for what they can't do." "You mean the speaking?" Deacon said. "Yes. The doctors in Fort Worth said there's nothing physically wrong with them. They can hear perfectly well. They just don't speak." Catherine sighed. "Thomas, their father, he never accepted it. Thought they were being stubborn or defiant. He wasn't. Kind about it." Anger flashed in Deacon's eyes. "He hurt them. Not physically, no. But he would shout at them, try to force them to talk. When that didn't work, he mostly ignored them." Catherine's voice was tight with old anger. "I tried to visit as often as I could, to make sure they were all right. After Rachel died, I wanted to take them, but Thomas wouldn't allow it. Said they were his children, his responsibility. Yet he was taking them to an orphanage," Deacon said, unable to keep the disgust from his voice. "Yes," Catherine confirmed sadly. "I think he just couldn't cope. Farming is hard enough without 2 small children to care for, especially children with special needs." Deacon was quiet for a moment, thinking about the silent twins and their difficult start in life. "Well, they've got you now," he said finally. "And you understand them." "I try to," Catherine said. "Sometimes I think I'm getting better at reading their signals, the way they communicate with gestures and expressions. Other times, I feel completely in the dark." "They know you love them," Deacon said with certainty. "That counts for a lot." Catherine's smile was grateful. Thank you for saying that. As they continued to talk, the fire burning down to embers, Deacon found himself watching Catherine's face, the way the firelight caught the gold flecks in her green eyes, the curve of her cheek, the strand of honey-brown hair that had escaped her braid. She was beautiful in a quiet, strong way that appealed to him far more than the painted women in the saloons he occasionally frequented. "We should reach Fort Worth by tomorrow evening," he said, reluctantly changing the subject. "Weather holds, that is." Catherine nodded, her expression a mix of relief and something else, regret, perhaps. "Yes, it will be good to be home. The girls need stability, routine. And you? What do you need?" The question slipped out before Deacon could think better of it. Catherine looked startled, then thoughtful. "I've never really considered that," she admitted. "Since Rachel died, it's been all about the twins. Before that, then," Deacon pressed gently. What did Catherine Gray want for herself? She was quiet for so long that Deacon thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "I wanted a family of my own. A home filled with children's laughter. A husband who would be a true partner." She smiled wryly. "Simple dreams, I suppose, but they were mine." "Not so simple," Deacon said, "but worth wanting." Their eyes met across the dying fire, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of shared loneliness perhaps, or of possibilities neither had allowed themselves to consider before. The moment was broken by a soft sound from the twins' bedroll. Jane was whimpering in her sleep, her small face contorted with distress. Catherine immediately went to her, gathering the child in her arms and murmuring soothing words. Jessie woke too, reaching for her sister with a concerned expression. Deacon watched as Catherine comforted both girls, struck by the tableau they presented, a family, bound not by blood in all cases, but by love and shared experience. It was a powerful image, one that stayed with him long after the twins had settled back to sleep and Catherine had returned to her own bedroll with a quiet good night. As he took the first watch, staring into the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight, Deacon James confronted a truth he had been avoiding. He didn't want to say goodbye to Catherine Gray and her silent nieces when they reached Fort Worth. Somehow, in the space of less than a week, these three females had become important to him in a way no one had been since before the war. The realization was as frightening as it was exhilarating. After years of keeping everyone at arm's length, protecting himself from the pain of loss, he had allowed himself to care. And now, he faced the prospect of watching them ride out of his life as quickly as they had entered it. Unless he found the courage to suggest another possibility. Fort Worth rose from the Texas plain like a testament to human determination, its buildings a mix of rough-hewn lumber and more substantial brick structures. In the 7 years since the railroad had arrived, the former Army outpost had grown into a bustling town, a vital shipping point for the cattle industry and a supply center for surrounding farms and ranches. Catherine felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as they approached the town limits. Relief to have completed the journey safely, to be bringing the twins to the place that would now be their home. Apprehension about what lay ahead, the challenges of raising 2 children alone, of supporting them on her modest teacher's salary, of helping them navigate a world that might not understand their silence. And there was another feeling, one she was reluctant to examine too closely. Regret that their journey with Deacon James was coming to an end. "That's our place," she said, pointing to a small white clapboard house set back from the road at the edge of town. "It's not much, but the garden's good, and there's a fine oak tree for shade in the summer." Deacon nodded, his expression unreadable as he studied the modest dwelling. "Looks like a proper home." The twins, who had been dozing in the wagon, sat up as they approached the house, their identical faces curious. Catherine wondered what they were thinking, what they understood about this significant change in their young lives. "This is your new home, sweethearts," she told them, bringing the wagon to a halt in front of the small porch. "We're going to live here together." The girls climbed down from the wagon and stood hand in hand, surveying the house and yard with solemn expressions. Then, in one of their synchronized movements, they walked to the oak tree and placed their hands on its rough bark, as if greeting it. Catherine smiled at the gesture, interpreting it as acceptance. "They like the tree," she said to Deacon, who had dismounted and was standing beside Samson. one hand on the horse's neck. "Good sign," he agreed, his voice gruff. There was an awkward moment as they both realized they had reached the end of their journey together. Catherine busied herself with unloading the wagon, uncertain what to say. "Let me help you get settled," Deacon offered, taking a crate of provisions from her hands. "Place has probably been closed up for a while. Might need some airing out." Grateful for the temporary reprieve from goodbye, Catherine unlocked the front door and led the way inside. The house was simple, a main room that served as both parlor and kitchen, 2 small bedrooms, and a lean-to addition at the back that housed a washroom. It was dusty from disuse, but otherwise just as she had left it. "It's cozy," Deacon observed, setting down the crate on the kitchen table. "It suits us," Catherine replied, opening windows to let in the fresh spring air. "The school where I teach is just a mile down the road. There's a good well out back, and the garden has productive soil." The twins had followed them inside and were exploring the small house with interest, opening cupboards and peering into corners, still holding hands. "That will be your room," Catherine told them, pointing to the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. "We can fix it up however you like." The girls nodded in unison, then continued their silent inspection of their new home. Working together, Catherine and Deacon brought in the supplies from the wagon, stocked the pantry, and cleaned the worst of the dust. The twins helped in their way, sweeping the floor with a broom they shared between them and arranging their few belongings in their new room. As the afternoon waned, the inevitable moment of parting drew nearer. Catherine prepared a simple dinner, the last they would share together, while Deacon took care of the horses, and the twins set the table without being asked. They ate mostly in silence, the mood subdued. The twins seemed to sense the impending separation, their expressions more solemn than usual as they glanced between the adults. After the meal, as Catherine washed the dishes and Deacon dried them, she felt the need to express her gratitude for all he had done. "I don't know how to thank you," she began, handing him a plate to dry. "Finding the girls, bringing us safely home. We owe you so much." Deacon focused intently on drying the plate. "No debt between friends," he said simply. Friends? Was that what they were? The word seemed simultaneously too much and not enough to describe what had developed between them during their journey. "Still, I wish there was some way to repay your kindness," Catherine persisted. Deacon set down the dried plate and turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "There's something I've been wanting to say," he began, then hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Catherine's heart quickened. "Yes, I've been thinking," he started, but was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Catherine frowned, puzzled. Few people in Fort Worth knew she had returned. Setting aside the dishcloth, she went to answer the door, Deacon following a step behind. A middle-aged woman stood on the porch, her face lighting up at the sight of Catherine. "Miss Gray, I thought I saw your wagon. Welcome home, Mrs. Porter." Catherine greeted her neighbor with a smile. "How kind of you to stop by. I've been keeping an eye on your place, just as you asked," Mrs. Porter said, then noticed Deacon standing behind Catherine. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company. This is Mr. James," Catherine introduced him. "He helped bring my nieces and me home safely from Willow Springs." Mrs. Porter's eyes widened with interest as she took in Deacon's tall form. "How fortunate for you to have such assistance," she said, her tone suggesting she found the situation intriguing. "And your nieces? They're well." "Yes, they're inside," Catherine replied. "They'll be living with me now." "Permanent, is it?" Mrs. Porter asked. "I had heard about your sister's passing. My condolences." "Thank you," Catherine said. "And yes, the arrangement is permanent. I'm their guardian now." Mrs. Porter nodded, her expression sympathetic but her eyes still curious as they darted between Catherine and Deacon. "Well, I won't intrude on your evening. Just wanted to welcome you home." "Oh," she reached into her basket. "Brought you some fresh eggs for your breakfast tomorrow." "That's very thoughtful," Catherine said, accepting the small package. "Thank you." After Mrs. Porter had departed with promises to visit properly the next day, Catherine closed the door with a sigh. Mrs. Porter is kind, but she's also the town's most dedicated gossip. By tomorrow, everyone will know we've returned and that you were here. Deacon raised an eyebrow. "That a problem?" "No," Catherine said quickly. "It's just small towns. People talk." Deacon nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. A single woman receiving a male visitor, even under innocent circumstances, could set tongues wagging. I should probably head into town, he said reluctantly. Find a room for the night. Catherine nodded, a lump forming in her throat. This was it, the goodbye she had been dreading. Of course. You must be tired after the journey. The twins appeared from their bedroom, as if sensing the imminent departure. They stood watching the adults with identical expressions of concern. Deacon crouched down to their level. Well, ladies, he said gently, this is where we part ways. You be good for your aunt, you hear? To everyone's astonishment, Jessie stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Deacon's neck in a tight hug. After a moment, Jane joined her sister, and Deacon found himself embraced by both twins simultaneously. Catherine watched, her eyes filling with tears at the unprecedented display of affection from her usually reserved nieces. Deacon looked equally moved, his large hands gently patting the girls' backs. I'll miss you too, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. When the twins finally released him and stepped back, their eyes were sad but dry. They took each other's hands again and retreated to their room without a backward glance, closing the door behind them with a quiet click. Deacon straightened, his expression troubled. They all right? They're saying goodbye in their own way, Catherine explained, wiping away a stray tear. They've had too many people leave them already. Deacon nodded, his jaw tight. Shouldn't have to go through that. Not at their age. No, Catherine agreed. But they're resilient. And they have each other. They moved to the front door, both reluctant to end the conversation that would mark the end of their time together. Where will you go after Fort Worth? Catherine asked, hoping to extend the moment. Back to my cabin for a spell, Deacon replied. Then there's a cattle drive to Abilene starting in a few weeks. Boss sent word he wants me as trail boss this time. That's a significant responsibility, Catherine observed. He must think highly of your abilities. Deacon shrugged modestly. Been doing it a long time. Know the trails, the hazards. Another silence fell, heavy with unspoken words. Catherine, Deacon began, his voice serious. What I was trying to say earlier, before Mrs. Porter arrived. Yes, Catherine prompted when he hesitated. Deacon took a deep breath. These past days, traveling with you and the girls. It's been good. Better than good. Catherine's heart quickened. It has, she agreed softly. Made me think about things, Deacon continued, his eyes meeting hers directly. About the kind of life I've been living. The kind I might want instead. Catherine hardly dared breathe, afraid to break the spell of the moment. I'm not a man of many words, Deacon said, and I know this is sudden. But I'd like to see you again. Properly, I mean. Call on you, if you'd permit it. Relief and joy flooded through Catherine. I'd like that very much, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. Deacon's face relaxed into a rare smile. When I get back from the cattle drive, then, midsummer, God willing. We'll be here, Catherine promised. Deacon reached out and, in a gesture that was both bold and tentative, took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. Take care of yourself, Catherine Gray. And those two little ones. We will, she assured him. And you be careful on the trail. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Always am. With a final nod, Deacon stepped off the porch and walked to where Samson waited patiently. Catherine watched as he mounted, adjusted his hat, and turned the horse toward town. At the end of the lane, he paused and looked back, raising his hand in a farewell gesture. Catherine returned the wave, then stood watching until his figure disappeared into the gathering dusk. Only then did she go back inside, closing the door on the empty yard, but carrying with her the promise of his return. In their small bedroom, the twins lay on their shared bed, still awake, their identical eyes questioning as Catherine checked on them. Mr. James will come back to visit us, she told them, smoothing the blanket over their small forms. He promised. The girls exchanged one of their mysterious glances, then settled more comfortably against their pillows, apparently satisfied with this assurance. Catherine sat with them until they drifted off to sleep, their hands clasped even in slumber. Then she moved to the main room and lit a lamp, its warm glow pushing back the darkness. Outside, the Texas night was full of stars, each one a point of light in the vast blackness. Catherine stood at the window, looking up at the heavens and allowing herself, for the first time in a very long time, to to hope for a future that included more than just duty and responsibility, a future that might also hold love. The summer of 1875 unfolded across the Texas plains in a tapestry of wildflowers and scorching heat. In Fort Worth, Catherine settled into a routine with the twins, teaching them at home when she wasn't at the schoolhouse and slowly coaxing them into a more comfortable relationship with the world around them. The girls remained silent, but their gestures and expressions became more varied and nuanced, at least with Catherine. They helped in the garden, accompanied her to town for supplies, and occasionally to church on Sundays, though they often became overwhelmed by the crowd and noise. Mrs. Porter and other neighbors stopped by regularly, ostensibly to welcome the twins, but clearly curious about the mysterious Mr. James and when he might return. Catherine deflected their questions with polite vagueness, unwilling to share the private hope she carried in her heart. As June turned to July, and July to August, that hope began to waver. The cattle drive to Abilene should have concluded by now, allowing sufficient time for Deacon's return journey to Texas. Yet there had been no word, no letter, no sign that he remembered his promise. Perhaps he changed his mind, Catherine told the twins one evening as they sat on the porch, seeking relief from the stifling heat inside the house. Men often do, you know. The girls, who had been braiding each other's hair, looked up at her with identical expressions of disagreement. Jessie, the more demonstrative of the two, shook her head emphatically. Catherine smiled at their loyalty. You're right. We shouldn't assume the worst. There could be many reasons for the delay. As if in answer to her words, a rider appeared on the road leading to their house, his form wavering in the heat rising from the baked earth. Catherine shaded her eyes, her heart leaping with recognition even before she could make out the details of his face or form. The twins saw him too, abandoning their braiding to stand at the porch railing, their small bodies vibrating with excitement. Deacon James rode up to the house, his paint horse moving at a steady walk. He looked travel-worn and tired, his face leaner than Catherine remembered, but his smile, when he saw them waiting on the porch, was like sunrise after a long night. Afternoon, ladies, he called, tipping his hat. Hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions inside her. We were just enjoying the evening breeze. Deacon dismounted stiffly, wincing slightly as his boots hit the ground. Mind if I join you? Please do, Catherine said, gesturing to the porch swing beside her. The twins had already rushed down the steps to greet Samson, stroking his nose and examining his saddle with curious hands. Deacon climbed the porch steps with care, and Catherine noticed a fresh scar on his forearm and the way he favored his left leg. You're hurt, she observed as he settled beside her on the swing. Had some trouble on the trail, he admitted. Stampede during a thunderstorm. Got caught between the cattle and a ravine. Catherine's concern must have shown on her face, for he quickly added, nothing serious. Doc and Abilene patched me up fine. Just takes time to heal completely. I was beginning to think you weren't coming back, Catherine said, voicing the fear that had grown over the silent weeks. Deacon's expression softened. Made a promise, didn't I? Just took longer than expected. Trail was rough this year, drought in some parts, flooding in others. Lost time and cattle both. I'm sorry to hear that, Catherine said. Was the drive successful otherwise? Successful enough, Deacon replied with a small shrug. Boss paid fair, despite the losses. They fell into a comfortable conversation, catching up on the events of the past months. Catherine told him about the twins' progress, their garden, her teaching position secured for the fall term. Deacon shared stories from the trail, the characters he'd met, the challenges they'd faced, the beauty of the landscapes they'd traversed. The twins eventually joined them on the porch, sitting on the steps and listening with apparent interest, though they remained as silent as ever. As twilight deepened into evening, Catherine invited Deacon to stay for supper. The meal was simple: fried chicken, biscuits, and fresh vegetables from the garden, but Deacon ate with appreciation, complimenting her cooking with genuine enthusiasm. The twins, usually reticent around visitors, seemed completely at ease with Deacon's presence. They even showed him a picture book they had been looking at, pointing to illustrations and glancing at him expectantly until he commented on each one. After the meal, as Catherine washed the dishes and Deacon dried them, falling back into the routine they had established during their journey, he broached the subject that had clearly been on his mind. "Been doing a lot of thinking these past months," he said, carefully setting a plate on the shelf. "About my life, what I want from it." Catherine's hands stilled in the dishwater. "And what conclusions did you reach?" Deacon was quiet for a moment, arranging his thoughts. "Cattle drives are a young man's game," he said finally. "Long days in the saddle, sleeping on the ground, facing whatever the trail throws at you. It wears on a body." Catherine nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. "You're considering a change?" "More than considering," Deacon confirmed. "Made an offer on a piece of land about 10 miles from here. Nothing fancy, couple 100 acres, a decent house, good water. Previous owner's widow is looking to move east to live with her daughter." Catherine's heart quickened. "You're staying in Fort Worth?" "If the offer's accepted, yes." Deacon met her eyes directly. "Thought I might try my hand at ranching. Smaller scale than the big outfits, but enough to make a living." "That's a significant change," Catherine observed, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the hope blooming in her chest. "Change was overdue," Deacon said simply. Then, with characteristic directness, he added, "Wanted to be near you and the girls. If that's something you might welcome." Catherine's breath caught. "We would welcome it very much," she said softly. Deacon's shoulders relaxed, tension he might not have been aware of draining away. "Good," he said, a rare smile lighting his weathered face. "That's good." They finished the dishes in a companionable silence, each absorbing the implications of this new understanding between them. When the kitchen was tidy, they joined the twins in the main room, where the girls were engaged in their silent play, arranging small wooden figures Catherine had carved for them. "It's getting late," Deacon observed reluctantly. "Should probably head back to town." "You could stay," Catherine offered impulsively. "The sofa isn't very comfortable, but it's better than riding back to town in the dark." Deacon hesitated, clearly torn between desire and propriety. "Neighbors might talk," he pointed out. Catherine smiled. "They already do. Mrs. Porter has been speculating about your return for weeks." "Has she now?" Deacon's expression was amused. "And what does Mrs. Porter think about all this?" "She thinks you're a mysterious drifter with a dark past who has somehow captured the attention of the normally sensible schoolteacher," Catherine said lightly. "Very romantic, according to her." Deacon chuckled. "Well, I'd hate to disappoint Mrs. Porter's sense of drama." His acceptance of her invitation felt like a small victory, a step toward the future Catherine was beginning to envision. As she prepared the sofa with sheets and a pillow, the twins ready for bed in their room, Deacon stood by the window, looking out at the star-filled Texas sky. "Never thought I'd find this," he said quietly when Catherine joined him. "Find what?" she asked. "A place that feels like it could be home," Deacon replied. "People who make me want to stay in one spot." Catherine's heart swelled with emotion. "Is that what we are to you? Home?" Deacon turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "Starting to feel that way," he admitted. "If you'll have me." "Deacon James," Catherine said, gathering her courage. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life, though I didn't know it until you rode up to my house with my nieces on your horse." Deacon's eyes darkened with emotion. Slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. When they parted, Catherine felt breathless, her cheeks warm with a blush she was glad the dim light concealed. "I should say good night," she murmured, reluctant to end the moment but aware of the propriety they both respected. Deacon nodded, equally reluctant. "Good night, Catherine." In her bedroom, preparing for sleep, Catherine heard the faint creak of the sofa as Deacon settled for the night. The sound was comforting, domestic in a way that made her smile into the darkness. On the other side of the wall, the twins lay in their shared bed, hands clasped as always, their identical faces peaceful in sleep. Catherine checked on them, as she did every night, tucking the light blanket around their small forms and pressing a kiss to each forehead. "Sweet dreams, my darlings," she whispered. As she returned to her own room, Catherine felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The future, which had once seemed a long, lonely road of duty and responsibility, now shimmered with possibilities she had almost stopped hoping for. Outside, the Texas night wrapped around the small house like a protective embrace, stars winking in the vast darkness above. Inside, for souls too silent, two finding their voices with each other rested under the same roof, connected by threads of circumstance, compassion, and growing love. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they were slipping into a pattern that had been waiting for them all along. Deacon's offer on the ranch was accepted, and he divided his time between preparing his new property and visiting Catherine and the twins. The girls bloomed under his attention, greeting him with silent excitement whenever he appeared and following him around as he helped Catherine with repairs to the house and garden. They seemed to understand intuitively that he was becoming a permanent fixture in their lives, and they approved wholeheartedly. Catherine watched the developing relationship between Deacon and the twins with a full heart. He was patient with them, never pressuring them to speak, but communicating with them on their terms through gestures, expressions, and sometimes just quiet presence. He taught them to ride on a gentle pony he brought for them, his large hands steady on their small backs as they gained confidence in the saddle. The neighbors, of course, noticed the tall cowboy's frequent visits. Mrs. Porter, representing the collective curiosity of Fort Worth's social circle, finally cornered Catherine after church one Sunday. "That Mr. James seems quite settled in the area," she observed with studied casualness. "And quite attentive to you and the twins." "Yes," Catherine agreed simply. "He's purchased the old Reynolds place." "A cattleman becoming a rancher," Mrs. Porter mused. "Quite a transformation. One wonders what inspired such a change." Catherine met the older woman's inquisitive gaze directly. "Perhaps he found something worth staying for." Mrs. Porter's eyes widened slightly at the implication, then crinkled with genuine warmth. "Well, my dear, I for one am delighted. You deserve happiness after all you've been through." Word spread quickly after that. The formerly reserved schoolteacher and the mysterious cowboy were courting a development that provided Fort Worth with a fresh topic of conversation and speculation. For Catherine and Deacon, however, the opinions of others mattered far less than the growing certainty of their feelings for each other. Their courtship unfolded with the same straightforward honesty that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. They talked of their pasts, their hopes for the future, and increasingly, of the life they might build together. On a golden September evening, with harvest moon rising large and luminous over the Texas plains, Deacon arrived at Catherine's house with a special purpose in mind. The twins, as if sensing the significance of the occasion, were unusually cooperative about going to bed early, though Catherine noticed them watching Deacon with knowing glances as they bid him good night. "They're up to something," she observed as she joined Deacon on the porch after tucking the girls in. They had that look they get when they're sharing a secret. Deacon smiled, shifting slightly on the porch swing to make room for her. "Smart little ladies. Don't miss much." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the night sounds: crickets chirping, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft creaking of the swing as they gently rocked. "Ranch is coming along," Deacon said finally. "Got the house fixed up, fences mended. Bought a small herd to start with 30 head of good stock." "That's wonderful," Catherine said sincerely. "All your hard work is paying off." Deacon nodded, then added, "Still needs a woman's touch, though. House feels empty." Catherine's heart quickened at the implication. "Does it?" she asked softly. Deacon turned to face her, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Catherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm not a man who finds words easily, but I want you to know that meeting you and the twins, it changed everything for me." Catherine remained silent, sensing he needed to say this in his own way, at his own pace. "Been on my own most of my life," Deacon continued. "Thought that was how it would always be. Then I found 2 little girls under an oak tree, and their aunt came looking for them, and suddenly being alone didn't seem right anymore." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that gleamed in the moonlight, a ring with a modest diamond that nevertheless caught the light like a star. "I'm asking if you and the twins would consider making a family with me," Deacon said, his blue eyes steady on hers. "If you do me the honor of becoming my wife." Though she had suspected this was coming, the reality of the moment, Deacon James offering his heart to her under a harvest moon, made Catherine's eyes fill with tears of joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, we would love that very much." Deacon's face transformed with a smile so bright it rivaled the moon above them. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to seal their engagement with a kiss that spoke of all the love and promise contained in that single word, yes. When they parted, Catherine rested her forehead against his, savoring the moment. "The twins will be overjoyed," she murmured. "They adore you." "Feelings mutual," Deacon replied, his voice husky. "Never thought I'd be a father, but those two, they've got a hold on my heart." "They have that effect," Catherine agreed with a smile. "When shall we tell them?" "Morning's soon enough," Deacon said, drawing her closer on the swing. "Tonight's for us." They spent hours talking softly in the moonlight, planning their future together. Deacon would continue working on the ranch, building it into a sustainable operation. Catherine would teach until the twins were old enough for school, then decide whether to continue or focus on their growing family. "Might have more children someday," Deacon suggested tentatively. "If you wanted." Catherine's heart swelled at the thought. "I'd like that," she said. The twins should have siblings. As the night deepened around them, Catherine felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the trials and losses of her past had been leading her to this moment, this man, this future. From the tragedy of her sister's death and the mystery of the twins' silence had come an unexpected gift, a chance at the family and love she had always hoped for. When Deacon finally departed, promising to return the next day to speak with the twins, Catherine stood on the porch watching until he disappeared down the moonlit road. The ring on her finger caught the light as she raised her hand in farewell, a tangible symbol of the promise between them. Inside, she checked on the twins one last time before retiring. To her surprise, they were awake, their identical blue eyes watching her from their shared pillow. "You should be asleep," she admonished gently. The girls smiled in unison, their gazes dropping to her left hand where the ring gleamed. Jane reached out and touched it gently, then looked at her sister. Some silent communication passed between them, and Jessie nodded in apparent satisfaction. "You knew," Catherine realized, amazed once again by their perception. "Somehow, you knew what Deacon was planning." The twins' smiles widened, and they settled back against their pillow, clearly pleased with themselves and the turn of events. "Well, he's going to talk to you properly tomorrow," Catherine told them, tucking the blanket around them. "But yes, if you're wondering, we're going to be a family, all four of us together." The girls closed their eyes, their expressions peaceful. Catherine kissed each forehead, then retreated to her own room, her heart too full for sleep. Tomorrow, they would begin planning their new life together. There would be challenges, certainly the twins' continued silence, the adjustments of blending their lives, the work of building the ranch into a prosperous operation. But tonight, in the quiet of her room with the harvest moon shining through her window, Catherine Gray allowed herself to simply savor the joy of having found, against all odds, a love that embraced not only her, but the silent nieces who had become her daughters in all but name. The wedding took place on a crisp October day, with the Texas landscape painted in autumn hues of gold and russet. It was a small ceremony, held in the white clapboard church in Fort Worth, with only a few close friends in attendance. Mrs. Porter, of course, had appointed herself unofficial organizer, ensuring that the modest affair was nonetheless executed with proper decorum. Catherine wore a simple dress of ivory silk, her honey-brown hair adorned with small white flowers. Deacon, unaccustomed to formal attire, nevertheless cut a handsome figure in a new black suit, his usually wind-blown hair tamed for the occasion. But it was the twins who stole the show, dressed in identical blue dresses that matched their eyes, their blonde hair braided with ribbons. They performed their role as flower girls with solemn dignity, scattering petals with synchronized movements that brought smiles to the faces of the small congregation. When the minister pronounced Deacon and Catherine husband and wife, the twins broke into identical grins, their happiness evident despite their continued silence. As the newly formed family walked back down the aisle together, Catherine with her hand on Deacon's arm and the twins following behind, there was a sense of rightness that transcended the traditional ceremony. The small reception was held at Mrs. Porter's home, where the neighbors of Fort Worth offered their congratulations and good wishes to the couple. Catherine noticed how Deacon, initially uncomfortable with the attention, gradually relaxed as the afternoon progressed, his natural dignity and quiet charm winning over even the most skeptical of the townspeople. The twins, however, became overwhelmed by the crowd and noise, retreating to a quiet corner where they sat holding hands and watching the proceedings with wide eyes. Deacon, sensitive to their discomfort, frequently checked on them, sometimes sitting quietly beside them for a few minutes before returning to his duties as bridegroom. "They're lucky children, Mrs. Porter observed to Catherine as they watched Deacon crouch down to speak softly to the twins. "To have found a man who understands them so well." "We're all lucky," Catherine replied, her heart full as she watched her new husband with her nieces. "He has a gift for seeing people as they are, not as he wishes them to be." By late afternoon, they were ready to depart for their new home the ranch Deacon had been preparing for the past months. Their belongings had already been moved, Catherine's small house in town rented to a new schoolteacher who had arrived from the east. The twins, tired from the excitement of the day, fell asleep almost immediately in the back of the wagon as Deacon drove them toward their new home. Catherine sat beside him on the seat, her hand in his, watching the landscape roll by in the golden light of late afternoon. "Happy?" Deacon asked, glancing at her with a smile that still made her heart skip. "Completely," Catherine assured him, squeezing his hand. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he admitted, his voice gruff with emotion. "Never expected to have all this: a wife, children, a place of my own." "Children who don't speak," Catherine reminded him gently. "Are you sure you're prepared for that challenge? The doctor in Fort Worth still believes they might eventually talk, but—" "Doesn't matter to me if they never say a word," Deacon interrupted firmly. "They communicate just fine. World's the one with the problem if it can't understand them." Catherine's heart swelled with love for this man who accepted her nieces so completely. "You're going to be a wonderful father," she said softly. Deacon's expression turned thoughtful. "Hope so. Never had much of an example to follow." "You already are," Catherine assured him. "The way you are with them: patient, respectful, kind. That's what they need." As they approached the ranch, Catherine felt a flutter of anticipation. Though she had visited several times during the preparations, this would be her first arrival as mistress of the house, as Deacon's wife, as part of a family that was truly her own. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, a sturdy two-story structure of weathered wood and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and one side. Smoke curled from the chimney, evidence of the housekeeper Mrs. Porter had arranged to prepare the house for their arrival. In the fading light, with the golden glow of lamplight visible through the windows, it looked like something from a dream, a home waiting to embrace them. Deacon helped Catherine down from the wagon, then gently lifted each sleeping twin and carried them toward the house. Catherine opened the door, and they stepped over the threshold together, a family united not by blood in all cases, but by choice and love. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, had prepared a simple supper and made up the beds before discreetly departing, leaving the new family to settle in privately. Deacon carried the twins to the bedroom that had been prepared for them, a charming space with two small beds, though Catherine suspected they would continue to sleep together. A bookshelf already stocked with picture books, and curtains patterned with blue flowers that matched their eyes. After putting the still sleeping girls to bed, Deacon and Catherine shared their first meal as husband and wife at the kitchen table, talking softly about the day and their plans for the future. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and marveling at the bond between them. As they lay together afterward, Catherine's head on Deacon's chest and his arms wrapped securely around her, she felt a sense of completeness that had eluded her all her life. "I love you, Deacon James," she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Catherine James," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I have words to say." They fell asleep entwined. The first night of many they would spend together in the home they would build with love and patience and understanding. Morning brought the practical realities of their new life together. The twins, rested and curious, explored the ranch house with enthusiasm, discovering nooks and corners and claiming spaces as their own in their silent way. Deacon showed them the barn, introducing them to the horses and the small herd of cattle that represented the beginning of their ranching operation. Catherine set about organizing the household, establishing routines that would accommodate both the needs of the ranch and the continuing education of the twins. She had resigned from her teaching position but planned to homeschool the girls until they were ready if they ever would be to attend the town school. The days fell into a rhythm that suited them all. Deacon worked the ranch, sometimes with hired hands when the task required it, but often alone, taking pride in building something that would provide for his family. Catherine managed the household and taught the twins, who proved to be quick learners despite their silence. In the evenings, they gathered as a family reading, playing simple games, or sometimes just sitting together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. The twins, who had always communicated with each other through their unique silent language, began to include Deacon and Catherine more fully in their world, developing gestures and expressions that the adults gradually learned to interpret. As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch house became truly a home filled with warmth and laughter. The twins, though silent, could still express joy in their own way, and the deep, abiding love that had brought them together. On Christmas Eve, with snow rare in their part of Texas but frost painting delicate patterns on the windows, they gathered in the main room around a small pine tree Deacon had cut from their land. The twins had helped decorate it with paper chains and strings of dried berries, their small hands working in perfect tandem as always. Gifts were exchanged, practical items mostly, with a few special treasures. Deacon had carved wooden animals for the twins, intricate little figures of horses and cattle and wild creatures of the plains. Catherine had sewn new dresses for the girls and a warm flannel shirt for Deacon, who wore it immediately with evident pride in his wife's handiwork. The twins, to everyone's surprise, had created gifts of their own drawings carefully done on paper Deacon had brought from town, one for each adult. Catherine's depicted the four of them in front of the ranch house, stick figures holding hands. Deacon's showed him on horseback, his tall form instantly recognizable even in the children's simple style. "These are wonderful," Catherine exclaimed, genuinely touched by the effort and thought behind the gifts. "Thank you, darlings." Deacon studied his drawing with suspiciously bright eyes. "Fine artwork," he said gruffly. "Think I'll frame it for my desk." The twins beamed with identical expressions of pleasure, then turned expectantly to Catherine, who had one more surprise. "I have something special to tell all of you," she said, her heart racing with excitement. "Something I just found out for certain yesterday." Deacon looked at her curiously. "What is it?" Catherine took a deep breath. "Come spring, our family will be growing. We're going to have a baby." Deacon's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby?" he repeated, as if testing the word. "We're having a baby?" Catherine nodded, tears of happiness springing to her eyes at his reaction. "Yes, in May, according to Dr. Wilson." Deacon crossed the room in 2 long strides and gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. "A baby," he said again, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." When he set her down, they both turned to gauge the twins' reaction. The girls were watching with identical expressions of curiosity, and Catherine was relieved to see excitement. They approached cautiously, and Jessie reached out to touch Catherine's still flat stomach with a questioning look. "Yes, there's a baby growing in there," Catherine confirmed. "You're going to be big sisters." The twins exchanged one of their mysterious glances, then both placed their small hands on Catherine's abdomen, as if greeting their future sibling. The gesture was so sweet, so accepting, that Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes again. Deacon put his arms around all 3 of his girls, creating a circle of family that would soon expand to include one more. "Best Christmas gift ever," he said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of Catherine's head. That night, after the twins were asleep in their room, still sharing one bed despite having 2, Deacon and Catherine lay in their own bed, his hand resting protectively over her stomach. "Never thought I'd be a father," he said quietly. "Not to the twins, and certainly not to a baby of my own. Are you happy about it?" Catherine asked, though his reaction had left little doubt. "Happier than I've ever been," Deacon assured her. "Scared too, if I'm honest. It's a big responsibility." "We'll learn together," Catherine said, placing her hand over his. "Just as we're learning with the twins." Deacon was quiet for a moment, then said, "Think it's time we made it official with them too. The adoption papers. Make them James's properly." Catherine turned her head to look at him, though his features were shadowed in the darkness. "Are you sure?" They still bear Rachel's blood, not ours. They're ours in every way that matters, Deacon said firmly. Want them to know that. Want the world to know it too. Catherine's heart swelled with love for this man who had come into their lives so unexpectedly and embraced them all so completely. I'd like that, she said softly. I think they would too. As they drifted toward sleep, Catherine marveled at the journey that had brought them to this point. From the tragedy of her sister's death and the mystery of the twins' silence to the chance encounter that had brought Deacon into their lives, a chain of events that could have broken them, but instead had forged them into a family stronger than they could have ever imagined. With each passing moment, they were building a future filled with love, understanding, and the promise of new beginnings, as Catherine felt the delicate flutter of their unborn child, a new thread woven into their family's tapestry.